Hey everyone, my name is Sean Booth. I'm a professor of geography, and in this video you're going to learn about weathering and erosion and the evolution of landforms. Now sometimes weathering can be pretty mundane and sometimes it can be simply amazing. Okay, so let's talk about this. What goes up must come down. And so let's make a distinction between weathering and erosion. So weathering is simply breaking up rock into parts, whereas erosion is actually transporting it away. Another term would be mass wasting. Mass wasting might be a lot of soil or rock moving at one time. Think of a landslide, think of rock falls, mud flows, and so on. And then we also have two types of weathering that we need to talk about. So we have physical, also known as mechanical, more commonly known as that. And we have chemical weathering. So with mechanical weathering, a great example of that is with water. Water can penetrate into cracks, known as joints, and then slowly but surely work its way in deeper. Perhaps it's freezing at night and that water actually expands and slowly but surely cracks the rocks. In some cases, we get extraordinarily cracked rocks, like in the high areas like of the mountains. Now there are other types of ways that rocks can slowly crack. A good example might be columnar joining, where you have lava that slowly cools and then cracks in more or less hexagonal patterns, known as columnar joining. And that heating and cooling throughout millions of years also is pretty powerful. In the deserts, we have things like salt wedging that has kind of an effect. You can see that, let's say, in Utah. And we have faults in areas of like California, for example, where that obviously breaks up the rock. And then let's take a look now at biological weathering.
Check out all the roots going, like, finding their way down in between all these rocks. It's cool.
All right, so let's get back to it. So let's talk about weathering and the evolution of landforms. So basically, cracks are like super important with weathering, which just simply means the decay of rocks. As the cracks get a little wider through time, water penetrates in there and then progressively breaks up the rock into smaller pieces, and then that gets broken up into smaller pieces. And before you know it, you start to get, pieces through time that then break up. A couple aspects are the environment, whether it's hot or cold, whether it's dry or it's wet, could make a difference, right? The rock itself, whether it's sedimentary rock, which is a soft kind of rock, or a metamorphic rock, which is a hard rock, that also could matter as well. And then I wanted to talk about time. Time, is something that's really hard to get our heads around, but if we could stack quarters, let's say each year is a quarter. Well, it turns out about an inch is 15 years or 15 quarters. If you were to do 1,000,000 quarters, that would be over a mile high. That's like Jack and the Beanstalk or something like that. Like, it's super high. That's just 1,000,000 years. And 1,000,000 years is it's really short in geologic terms. So just want us to get an idea of time is a really important part as well. All right, I want to move on to a great case study now. Banff, Canada, talking about mechanical weathering, and then Yosemite as well, talking about things like exfoliation. Okay, so let's talk about Banff, that amazing place with majestic landscapes. Everywhere you look, there's tilted landscapes. Those are actually ancient seafloor beds, and those were moved thousands of miles to their present-day location. Now, millions of years ago, those limestones and shales were formed in the tropics. And then through plate tectonics, they were moved over toward the Rocky Mountains in Canada and folded, and now they're slowly but surely being weathered, eroded, and then eventually all that material is going to go into the ocean. So I want to take a look at some weathering mechanisms, for example, weathering, frost wedging, as we talked about. You add that up with gravity and these slopes that you find in Banff, and you start to get what we call talus slopes. That rock then is slowly broken into smaller and smaller pieces, goes into these lakes. The lakes then move the rocks eventually into rivers, and then rivers eventually get to the ocean. Now, the most prominent thing about Banff are the glaciers. Glaciers were pretty widespread about 2.5 million to 12,000 years ago. That's what we call the Pleistocene. But in Banff, they're still there. Glaciers are amazing in that they can pluck rock from the bedrock. Rocks sometimes roll on top of these tongues of ice and are carried miles away. And we're talking boulders here. And they also pulverize and grind anything that's beneath them. When I went to these glacier lakes, I found this stuff called glacial till. It was just sand, and you could see the evidence of that, grinding going on. So glaciers are really powerful in terms of mechanical weathering. You can really see it there in Banff. I also want to talk about Yosemite, where they also had glaciation, but they also have prominent landforms like Half Dome. And that is the result of exfoliation. Ah, Yosemite, nestled high in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. Everywhere you look, you see granite and water cascading down cliffs. Granite is an igneous intrusive rock, meaning it was formed deep within the Earth's crust. And it's strong here in Yosemite. Granite, however, has one flaw, and that's cracks or joints. This is because after millions of years of erosion and miles of material stacked upon it, now removed, the rock begins to peel like layers of an onion. The results are exfoliated domes, like Half Dome and other prominent features of Yosemite. Next, we're going to explore the canyons and foothills of Northern California and talk about chemical weathering. As I'm turning the airplane, check it out. You can see these rivers cutting through the Sierra Nevadas. This is a major mechanical weathering, but I know that chemical weathering is huge too, and water's central to that role. Moving on to the next canyon, I'm looking for some rock outcroppings. Okay, I see some down there, but I can't really take a good look at it, so let's land and then we'll take a look with the drone. So why am I looking for a limestone and marble outcropping? Well, because wherever you find limestone and marble, you're going to find a process called carbonation. And carbonation is simply when you mix CO2 from the atmosphere with water and you get this mild acid. That mild acid then can dissolve away limestone and create caves. In fact, there's this cave right across the river here called Hoover Caves in Northern California, which is typical of a lot of caves that you might find here in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Also, by the way, you're going to find karst topography, as it's called, in places like South China and South Asia. And there you have these really cool towers that create dramatic landscapes. So anyway, I want to move on now to finding some igneous weathering features that are close to me in the American River Canyon. So here we are in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and I'm looking at granite. We have quite a few granites here in the Sierra Nevadas near the American River Canyon. And we can really see the process of hydrolysis going on, which is chemical weathering, particularly of the minerals within granite, feldspar to be specific. Feldspar starts to react with water at those different ions that are in water, like oxygen and OH. Positively, negatively charged, starts to interact with feldspars, breaks it up, and it slowly decomposes it. It turns it into clay, as you can see here, and then it just crumbles away. All right, so when you do look around for other granite features here in the American River Canyon, you're going to see something that's like spheroidal weathering. That's a chemical weathering process that creates these amazing rounded boulders. And in this case here, I can just see this I don't know if you can see that. As I hold the camera up, I'm just looking at these big flakes that have come off. And it's kind of amazing how granite can do that. But this rock's probably pretty old. And so you do see the kind of the ordinary, but like I said, if you look at places like Joshua Tree in the desert southwest areas or the high Sierra Nevadas, you're going to see these rounded boulders that are called spheroidal weathering. Also, I wanted to talk about other areas like in Utah, where you're going to find sandstone from ancient seas. Those are ancient deposits. And if you look at the rocks, they look kind of rusted, and that's called oxidation, another chemical weathering process. You see streaks and red banding coming down the rocks. Finally, I want to talk about differential weathering, which is where you have weathering at different rates. So, for example, like Arches National Park has the delicate arch, and there's a remaining fin there still with carved out center there. And it's very famous in the desert southwest, but that's differential weathering. Here in Northern California, we have these amazing volcanic plateaus that are fairly recent in geologic history, where you have very hard surface, and then when it rains, you get these great waterfalls that go off of them. And then to finish, you know, like the Grand Canyon is really famous for these amazing evolution of landforms. So let me just show you some more pictures. And I think that's about it for talking about weathering and the evolution of landforms.